Trojan women, Trojan children, Trojans of all ages, and a few Greek soldiers. As the marauding Greek army slashed, stabbed, and torched its way through the once impenetrable interior of the great city, all those who perished that night filed into the underworld in great numbers. Hades observed them all with a mixture of resignation, disgust, pity, and anger. The meddling of his brothers and sisters in mortal affairs resulted in the most significant mass immigration he had ever received. That opening paragraph defines The Changing of the Gods, written by Anthony J. Miano. As you can see there, try to anyway. And we're going to talk with Mr. Miano today on Shop Talk. Stay tuned. How you doing?
I'm holding together, thank you.
Yeah, I was reading your credentials here, and let's see. Anthony J. Miano is a former soldier, current broadcaster. His military occupational specialties include 19 Delta Cavalry Scout and 37 Foxtrot Psychological Operations Specialist. Mr. Miano is a graduate of the University of Akron and the Ohio Media School. He also co-hosts the No Outlet Live podcast. That's a pretty impressive amount of credentials you got.
That last thing is no longer accurate. It was at the time my book was published, but I've since left that show.
Oh, yeah. And now you're a published author.
Yes. Well, yeah, I published back in January. For now, I'm trying to make my living narrating audiobooks.
Right.
I've got 18 of them recorded. Most of them are available on Audible, but the auditions have dried up lately. I don't know if I've started messing up, but I'm going to have another narrator and somebody from Ohio Media School listen to my recent auditions and see if they can figure out where I went wrong.
Right. But Audible's kind of hit and miss anyway. You know, especially with there's so many people, narrators that get on that platform, and they think it's going to be kind of easy. And for some it is, you know, for some people they have the right voice and stuff like that for it. But that's one thing I have noticed. It's kind of difficult to break into that. So you got this long list of credentials, and that's pretty impressive.
I have the right voice for audiobooks. The problem is the amount of competition, and it's I'm hoping it's just a numbers game, that if I keep at it, I'll get more, and then as I get more, it'll be easier to get more.
Right. Yeah. It's well, I think you've actually, like I said, you got a long list of impressive credentials. On Changing of the Gods, where did that idea come from? I mean, are you into Greek mythology or
a little bit? I think the initial sparks were probably from two things. There was back in 2009, there was a History Channel program called Clash of the Gods, where they would do episodes about Hades, Zeus, Hercules, Medusa, the Minotaur, Tolkien's mythology, Beowulf, and Thor. And they would have a voiceover narrator going, "That is the myth, but what is the connection to reality?" And there'd be actors doing silent reenactments, and then it would cut to academians explaining things. And they said things like, to the ancient Greek mind, it didn't really matter that it wasn't Hercules' fault that he murdered his wife and children. And I'm like, how did Hera not face any consequences for that? And then the other was in, are you familiar with the Trojan women?
Refresh my memory.
So it's by Euripides. It's set the day after the Trojan War ended, and it's from the point of view of the women of Troy, and Cassandra, Andromache, Hecuba, and they're all waiting to be taken off into slavery by the Greeks. And Odysseus convinces the victorious Greeks that it's necessary to kill Hector's infant son to ensure he can't grow up to seek revenge. And they throw him from the walls of Troy. And then after the events of the Odyssey, Odysseus presumably gets a long, happy, healthy life despite committing the premeditated murder of a child. And then people tend to miss the first thing he does in the Odyssey is commit a war crime. He takes his men and they attack this smaller city that supported Troy, but the war was over.
Okay.
You see why I kind of have a problem with him.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of people would have a problem with that. But
and then the ultimate irony was, I'm sure I know the Odyssey has been mandatory reading in schools for a while, and my late stepdad was retired from the Army. He started off in Vietnam. That's the maroon beret in the middle up there was his. In fact, I'm gonna get
wow.
from when he ended his Army career, and people spat on him and called him a baby killer when he came home from Vietnam. And then I thought, how many Vietnam veterans were forced to read about Odysseus in school? Because that guy literally killed a baby, and not in the heat of battle. He made a calculated decision to throw an infant child off the walls of Troy. And that was something I felt he should not be allowed to walk away from. And his punishment during the events of the Odyssey was just for pissing off Poseidon personally.
Right.
And that's why Hades lets Hector leave the underworld later on so that he can seek revenge.
Right. Yeah, when I was reading that particular scene, I was like, you had it dialed in, to where it was very, very readable, very relatable, and very real. So, and it kind of made me wonder if it was like a little personal, maybe with Casca, because that's where you and I met. Because when I was reading that part of it, because you and I, we've talked about the Casca series, on and off over the past year and a half maybe. And then with that particular scene, when I was reading it, I was thinking that looks like a Casca story.
When Hector runs Odysseus through with the sword? I don't think I went a little further than anything, at least in detail on that, than Casca would have, because it goes through his breastplate, out the back end, and then through the back end of the armor to the point where the sword literally gets stuck in the wall behind him. Right. I don't think Casca ever did quite that much to one guy.
No.
Except for that dude he crucified.
Yeah. And then, so is this your first book? Your first story? Have you been published before by anybody else?
No.
No. So this is your very first publication.
Yes.
And how does it feel?
Pretty good. And I've got plans for it. There's a review of it on YouTube that I managed to make happen. The channel is called The Mythology Guy.
Okay.
Just type in The Mythology Guy, The Changing of the Gods. And he had, at the time it aired back in August, or when it premiered back in August, 700,000 subscribers. So I'm hoping that can turn into a long-term vehicle for promotion. I'm also working on getting a YouTuber called Dom Noble to promote it on his channel. he does this program called Lost in Adaptation, where he reviews movies that are based on books, goes over how faithfully they adapted the source material, whether he thinks it worked well or worked out badly. But he also has episodes that are just about books that don't have a film adaptation.
Right.
And he has around 1 million subscribers.
Oh, wow. That's even more impressive. So hopefully my show here can help you out with that, because this is, like I said, this is definitely, I've read this one twice, you know. So when you first told me about it, when it was released, I was kind of like, well, okay, well, I'll give it a shot, you know, because I do like to support, the small guys in all their, publishing endeavors and everything. But this one it really was that good that I read it twice. So, and what was interesting was the ending. And this was kind of like, when I was reading it, it was almost
Spoiler
like,
alert, maybe?
huh?
For listeners, do we want to put in a spoiler alert here?
Well, I don't want to spoil. I don't want to spoil
Okay.
it. I
We
really
won't go
don't.
there.
But it's the ending to me. It was kind of like the twilight of the gods, and it was like Hades and everybody else didn't quite know that the events in the book were actually leading up to their end.
That's one thing I did with a certain word in when Tiresias appears. So I'm gonna say just enough that the reader will know kind of where it is, but not enough to spoil it. It's one of the I played on the difference between when you hear a word and when you read the same word. That word is spelled differently for the reader than the characters hear.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not even going to say what that word is, because it's not a racial slur or profanity or anything like that. But also, some of my readers who have finished it all said they completely did not see the ending coming.
Right. Yeah, but it's like I said, it would seem like to me it was Twilight of the Gods. It was like the waning years, and they all didn't know it until a certain point in the story when they realized, well, something had to change.
Oh yeah, and I do believe I may be there is a certain thing in that final chapter I may be the first ever author to have done. Let's just say it's the brief fight that occurs at the beginning of that chapter. I don't believe any other author has done that. Now, I also believe, and this is not much of a spoiler, I might be the first ever author to do what I did with Ares.
And that was another interesting character, because you actually humanized him.
Oh yeah. He was originally going to be my main antagonist. I was thinking of one of the other things I wanted to do when I first wrote this was I didn't know if I wanted to try to write this as a book, a screenplay, or even a theater play. So I wanted to think of a story structure that would be easy to do as any one of those. And so I got to thinking courtroom drama, and I would have Hades as either a prosecutor or a judge, and Ares would have been the main defendant.
Okay.
For the Trojan War. But then I looked at it and I realized that, and this was another one of my themes, that one of the worst things about the Trojan War was all of the opportunities to de-escalate it or stop it. It did not have to go that far, and that's why Hades calls out Zeus, Athena, Artemis, even Aphrodite for their individual roles in it. And let's just say part of the reason certain characters got punished considerably less than others was remorse.
Yeah. And then even Ares had that sense of remorse.
And that's what, let's just say in the big fight in the middle of the book, I didn't want to come out and specifically say or spoon feed it to the reader, but because of what Ares has going on, it should be inferable why he's not getting involved
Right.
in that one. And the thing I did with the Fates was he knows that yes, the Trojan War was like the worst thing that had happened in that world up to then, but he knows just how bad it's gonna get. Like when he shows Hades that part with the guy literally getting his head vaporized.
Right.
That was meant to be a description of a insurgent getting his head blown off by a 50 caliber sniper rifle.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Did you, because you've been in the military, and
Correct.
so did you inject some of your military experience within the book?
A little bit. The thing was, I never got deployed, but knew plenty of men who did. And then even without that, there is still the family legacy behind me. The array I showed you earlier was my stepdad's. I've got my black one and my NCO service cap up there. The one on my far left, your far right, is my uncle's green one from when he was in Special Forces. The sword to my right, your left, is my grandfather's ceremonial sword. He was a retired Marine. He was one of the last Iwo Jima Marines.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah,
So your family has a long, proud history within the military.
yep, 10 of us in total.
Oh, wow.
Three,
That's
I was raised by my mom and stepdad, but my biological father was still in my life after the divorce. So I have 3 branches of the family tree and not 2. And it's 3 parents, 3 grandfathers, 3 uncles, and me.
okay.
And then half of them are dead now, but I've maintained the legacy behind me.
Right. So how long did it take you to write this book?
Mm.
It would seem like you started out multiple times, and and you weren't quite sure if that was the direction you wanted to go. So
Well, let's just say I thought up the last chapter first. I wasn't even sure that was going to be the ending or the beginning. Then I thought up the first, and then for a while I was just blank. I just did not know where to go from there. And then in 2020, I worked at the BMV for a little Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and then the state of Ohio started shutting down for COVID. And I am building to a point here, so I'll try and make it quick. But then during that quarantine, I got to thinking, what do I want to do? And I decided, yeah, I'm not going to go back to the BMV. I'm going to pursue the career in radio everyone's been telling me I have the voice for. So I enrolled at the Ohio Media School. I did 8 months in their radio and television broadcasting program. Then I immediately rolled into an emphasis program, which is basically media school version of graduate school. I enrolled in media, sales, and marketing. And then I ended up thinking this big elaborate plan for a YouTube channel called I Am Fitness, which eventually I was like, yeah, I'm not going to stick with this. It could be years before I make any money. But that program gave me the spark to start writing Changing of the Gods. And that was all spring and summer of last year.
yeah, did you want to be always had you always had the want and drive to be a writer?
No, I don't think I think maybe around 2018 was when I had the initial spark for this book.
Right. So you never published anything before? No short stories, no nothing.
No,
You just
Nothing.
got the wild hair and said, I'm going to write this book.
Oh yeah, I even consulted some of those academians from that History Channel show I was talking about, and one of them, Professor Fontaine from Cornell, actually wrote me back, and he said, "This sounds like good fan fiction." And I thought, fan fiction? Oh no, I am not putting this on the internet for free.
Right.
And then I thought about it, I'm like, well, with his education and expertise, if he sees it as fan fiction, which it technically is, I don't mind him calling it that. Of
Right.
course, technically, Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno are Bible fan fiction, but nobody calls them that thing.
Right. So have they read, as any of those university professors, have they read this finished product?
No, I sent Professor Fontaine a copy. Whether or not he'll ever actually read it, I don't know.
Right.
I also sent a copy. I've got about a dozen copies now that I'm trying to get rid of, because when I was first promoting this, I did some author events where I had to buy copies of my own book and then try to sell them there. And then after a couple of them, I figured out, wait a minute, this isn't gonna work. So now I'm trying to send them to people who I think might be able to promote it.
Help you out with that now. And then, that's the hardest part. And people say writing the book's the easiest, and getting it published and stuff like that can be the easiest. It's the marketing angle.
Oh yeah.
Everybody that I've talked to, they have an issue with the marketing angle.
Yeah, and I've gotten phone calls out of the blue from marketing firms that want to charge me like starting around $1,000 to promote it, and I just say, I just get irate during the phone calls. I'll be like, shut up. Here's my email address. And then I will tell them my email address and then hang up and be like, you can send it there. And if I like it, I'll get back to you. And I'm not going to like it if it involves me paying up front.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. There's so many scams out there. And you have to do due diligence and research into every aspect of what people's claims are. And because you're going to be investing a bunch of money into this venture, and then if you don't get that money back out within a certain time frame, it's just all for nothing.
I know. I'm being patient. I did get my book to one other person besides Professor Fontaine, who I know did receive it. Are you familiar with Mike Durant?
No.
Are you familiar with Black Hawk Down?
Yes.
Okay. He was the only survivor from either of the two Black Hawk helicopters that were shot down in the movie and the real life events, and the two Delta Force operators that killed hundreds of Somali militiamen fighting their way to his crash site and saving him received a posthumous Medal of Honor. And he wrote his own account of it called In the Company of Heroes. And I actually approached him for using one of his quotes for a chapter quote in a Changing of the Gods sequel. And the quote up from him I want to use is, I'm not a hero. I'm just a survivor with medals. And he's like, yeah, I'm fine with you using that quote. You remember the chapter quotes I had at the start of every chapter?
Yeah.
Of everyone I quoted, maybe the Dalai Lama is still alive. All the other historical figures that I used quotes from are long dead, but Mike Durant will likely still be around when I publish the sequel. But I also was hoping he'd read my book and then maybe talk about it on LinkedIn, because he's not big in publishing anymore, but he does have a sphere of influence still.
Right. And nothing's happened there just yet.
No, I'm sure he's a busy man. He also founded an aerospace or engineering research company after retirement from the Army, so I know he's still a busy guy.
Right. So you're talking about a sequel to the Changing of the Gods.
Let's just say, without going too deep into it, the the point of it, and I'm going to be fusing it with alternate history, which is something I picked up from years of reading Harry Turtledove. I'm going to have the gods change the outcome of the Trojan War.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Troy will win the war.
Okay. Yeah, you kind of hinted a little bit at that. There was near the end of the book. They were
Yeah.
having they were having a discussion about uh, some of the people that were in Hades' domain would actually go to. They were they were discussing this with. This is in the last chapter, and they were discussing this with the character I don't want to mention, okay, because it might ruin it. But they were talking to him about these people will go to a paradise where they'll relive their lives and where,
Without being victims of outside forces like the war.
yeah,
Yeah, this is good. Let's just say I'll divulge, and I already have the first chapter of the sequel written. The Greek, I start with what's called a. All the other counts of the Trojan horse are what you call bird's eye view, like the big strategic level planning. I actually went in on the ground. I had Odysseus think about the details of the horse. Like it would have to be a certain size. They would have to build it so that the Trojans couldn't see inside, but they would still have to have ventilation so that the men inside don't pass out, but they also can't be moving around. They can't, because they'd have to stay quiet for like at least several hours before the Trojans got all drunk and passed out. So how do they go about it? So I have Hermes give him something that'll sedate the guys until it's time to come out, and then they're gonna fast rope out of the horse, and then they're gonna get ambushed by the element of the Trojan army that stayed sober. I'm gonna have the Trojans will light the signal fire on top of the walls, the one that was supposed to signal the rest of the Greek army to come on in, and then this is something I took from that movie Sicario, where there's the flayed bodies of people killed by drug cartels
yeah,
hanging
yeah,
around Juarez. And so the Greeks are going to get there and they're going to find their entire strike force that they sent in the horse hanging from the walls of Troy and lit up by fire. And they're going to find Odysseus. He'll be like the one that they didn't fuck up, just as a way of saying, yeah, we killed your best and brightest. And the Greeks will have called it, the chapter title is Operation Last Resort. Because if the horse had failed, the Greeks would have been totally screwed, because remember, it's 10 years of war up to this point.
right,
They've probably lost quite a few men, and it's not like, and they're not the Russian army. They don't have these huge reserves to draw from. And then so yeah, the Greeks run away, and then I'm going to go into the Trojans going, okay, what do we do now? The gods are going to be like, what do we do now? Uh, Hector is going to be one of the more moderate voices. Much of Troy wants to follow the Greeks back to their city states and level them.
right.
And big picture, I'm going to have Troy survive as a major power to the present day.
Is Hades gonna play a major
I
role
don't
like he
know.
did in this one?
I don't know. Ares is going to might become more of a protagonist. And then I've got a couple of storylines where the women of Olympus are going to be the focus. I'm going to have Athena, Hera, maybe even Artemis interacting with women like Boudica, Joan of Arc, maybe Queen Victoria.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
And then Poseidon is going to have his own storyline. I figure I'll get him involved in stories like the Marie Celeste.
What about your research?
Well, I did
Do you research everything, like
a
every
little
down to
bit.
the small detail, or do you just jump in there and just start writing it Because you know, it seems like you know enough about Greek mythology. I haven't studied Greek mythology since like high school.
Uh,
Always, it
well,
always interested me, and then I always envisioned Odysseus to be kind of a good guy. But you paint,
well, he was, and that he actually surprised me while I was writing this because I thought I was just going to have. I even had Hades say, "What? Call Hephaestus, and I need a new form of torture invented for this guy." And then I had Odysseus make the argument that reflects the way I see most politicians, and this is not a Republican or Democrat argument. How my problem with both parties is that, with exceptions like Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, none of them have held a regular job before. And no, I don't consider being a military officer or a community organizer to be a regular job. And they're making decisions that affect everyone else in America with no idea of how most Americans actually live. And that's where I was kind of coming from when Odysseus says, "My friends and I fought, bled, and died for 10 years. Hades, you and your friends can't bleed. You can't die." That's why Odysseus got off considerably easier than I was originally expecting. But as for the research, I did a little bit into things like I had to look for stories about Hephaestus because he's one of the less developed ones in the original source material. I also had to dig for some to find some bad things that Hermes did because he is depicted so much as just a messenger or go-between with the other gods. He gets next to no character development of his own. In fact, Nathan Fillion's one scene as him in the second Percy Jackson movie was more character development than he ever got in thousands of years before. Uh, and I found that he had raped at least 2 women.
oh wow! And then
Yeah.
this is all in Greek mythology, right?
Yes, it's just one of the smaller stories that has not gotten any books written about it or any films made. I also did some research to find things like the one of the future scenes Ares shows Hades is a bunker buster bomb going off, which
Yeah,
is, and so I looked up what kind of aircraft would carry one of these, and that's why, and I took some of the details. I what I think I hit one of the things I'm proud of was I hit a good balance with describing modern things from the perspective of ancient characters. Like that's where I got the idea that they would see a modern day airplane as a metal bird.
right.
And for a fighter plane with a see-through cockpit, they'd be like, and somehow the man got into the bird's brain and is controlling the bird.
Right. Yeah, that was a good part of the when I was reading that. That was good.
Oh yeah, and that's also what formed the when Hades showed Odysseus the soldiers looting that room full of money. That was from the during the initial stages of the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Some soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division found 200 million in American currency in one of Saddam's stash houses.
So you kind of like I said, you take what you learned in the military and you've integrated pieces into this.
Yes.
So, and that's what I found interesting because I was when I was reading it, I was like, it sounds like a little bit of personal experience that he's injecting into the story. That's why I was asking about that.
Yeah.
So,
Ideally, if it was good enough that it makes veterans think of Iraq or Afghanistan think I've been there, I consider that a major victory. Now, I have never said that I was.
mm,
I want to make that very clear so I'm not accused of what's called stolen valor. Uh,
right. That's a big
One,
thing.
yeah, the one person I know who has been to Iraq or Afghanistan that read it did not comment much on my personal knowledge or expertise or experience being in there, probably because he knew me well in real life. He's a lieutenant colonel now. He was my company commander for a couple of years when I was in the Army Reserve. He read it and liked it.
Yeah,
But
okay.
of course, he knows I was never there, so maybe that's why he didn't comment.
Right, right. It's back to the research. And what I mean, did you think about self-publishing this, or did you just decide to go with a publishing house?
I decided to self-publish through a publishing house because it was either I can get this done now or I could spend years or even the rest of my life trying to pitch it to publishers through what's
Right.
called traditional.
So you went with the author house.
Yes, and I think it might have been partly their rates. I must have found their rates affordable. Honestly, the whole sequence of contacting publishers and talking about it is enough of a blur that all I can really solidly remember is Author House must have seemed like the best way to go. It also might, I also easily could have spent years evaluating publishing houses.
Mm,
And you ever heard the expression, a okay plan now is better than a perfect plan a while from now?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to spend too much time on looking for a publisher. It's like when I was that's why I didn't do as deep of research as you might think I did, because it could have easily turned into become like a doctorate level expert on all the characters before I even start writing, and thus never get it done.
Right. Okay. So you decide. So basically, you just hip shot. You just 2018. You became a writer. Decided I'm going to write this book. You sat down. You wrote it, and
In
then
2021.
yeah, 2021, and then you decided to go more or less. Author House. That's a traditional publisher, though, right?
Yes, but you can still self-publish through traditional publishers. If I understand things correctly, Author House does still do the traditional publishing model. They're not solely sustained by self-publishing authors paying them. It, yeah, I was thoroughly confused by this whole process. Let's just say I went with Author House to get the book out there. I'm not sure if I'll go with them again on any potential sequels or any other books I might write, for example.
So you're gonna try and self-publish next time, or were you thinking about another traditional publishing house?
I think I'll self-publish, especially if I can successfully get this book off the ground, and by which I mean more sales, bigger audience, and my ultimate pie in the sky goal. And this is like maybe not even accomplish this while I'm still alive, is get it adapted to the screen, preferably as a streaming series, because I packed too much into this book for a standard film runtime.
I don't know. Like, what is it? It's 128 pages. I mean,
Yeah, but I have a dozen.
it's a
I have a
fast
dozen
read.
characters.
You know, like yeah, 100 and yeah, it's about 130 pages, but it's still. I mean, it was such a fast read. That I had it done within a day or two. This last
Uh,
time.
I wanted to make it longer, but then I remembered the rule that I picked up from some of the YouTubers I watch, which is make it as long as you need to tell your story.
Right. Yeah.
Don't try and make it longer or shorter.
Right. So your audience. Now, have you had people tell you, "Hey, what a great story"?
Oh yeah, I've gotten some good reviews. There's about a dozen of them on Amazon right now. I did have a
You,
friend
there's 20.
criticize the modern lingo that I worked in,
Mm,
and I thought, yeah, whatever. It just felt more natural to try to have the gods speaking more modern.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I've tried reading. Ironically, I have not read the Iliad, which I know is going to surprise you because I tried, and the way it's written is just unreadable to my modern brain. Like I would have to like read a sentence or a page and then stop and analyze it.
right. Yeah. Well,
And
their way of talking back then and writing was different than the
ex-
way it is now. And that was another thing too, is that you do inject modern terminology and language, and that can be relatable for the reader.
but it
And
can also take them out of it depending on the
yeah,
reader.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm not losing much sleep over that, if any. And
No, no, it's actually well done. So
yeah, and I deliberately worked in some things that were I took a cue from J.K. Rowling in the Harry Potter series. There are several instances where she describes a character's tone or facial expression after they say anything like Snape's face looked as though Christmas had been canceled.
right.
So I did that a couple of times, like when I said his face had the look of a man who had just learned his wife had been unfaithful with his brother.
Yeah,
Just,
yeah, I did see that. It was that I thought, well, that's interesting. I'd never heard of it put that
and
way.
then I also worked in some deliberate nods to Greek myth stories that were not otherwise referenced in the book, like his jaw plummeted like Icarus falling from the sky.
Still good wording. Yeah,
Yeah, and especially I figure the vast majority of people that read my book would know who that person was.
right.
Yeah.
And
I think I did a pretty good mix of modern and
old,
ancient dialogue.
right. And then
Yeah.
you added in the historical elements. You added in Greek mythology. And I mean, like I said, it's just a well written book, and and I'm hoping a lot more people will actually notice this book because
Oh yeah.
I I can't say enough good things about it, and that's pretty much what Shop talks about. Is trying to help out the little guys. Just trying to get their, especially if the book's good, it needs to be, people need to know about it. So, and that's what I was trying to do with Tony Roberts and the Casca series. We did that 7 episodes, and there was even people that were like, I didn't even know the Casca series was still going. It's like, how can you not? You know, but
I'd like to see it adapted to the screen, but the story is so big that it would be difficult to fit it into a standard film runtime.
yeah, well, apparently I want to say it's optioned, but as far as I know, it's just optioned. And I mean, when something's optioned, it's not set in concrete,
Okay.
So I
I think
mean,
a streaming series would be an excellent way to go.
yeah, especially this day and age, streaming would probably be the best bet if it was ever going to happen. But I don't know,
I think
so
it's too much of a niche audience for it to be adapted into by any film studio. Yeah.
Medusa. What was the deal with Medusa?
In the original storyline, there's actually two versions of this. One of them, in both of them, she was raped by Poseidon,
Hmm.
and in the one version, Athena treats it like it's her fault, and she punishes her by transforming her into the hideous monster with snake hair and exiling her to that deserted island.
Hmm.
In the other version, she takes pity on Medusa and transforms her into that as a way to protect herself
Hmm.
from that. And it's my understanding in the original source material, Poseidon never faces any consequences for what he did.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things I wanted to address in this book. You can
Yeah,
throw in like a
because and that was the thing too. You bring up all the gods, you bring up all their faults, and how they never got punished for doing these things that were morally incorrect.
yeah, well, some of them did, but not in the way they deserve. There's one story where the gods briefly overthrew Zeus,
Mm-hmm.
and they chained him up. Hera instigated the whole thing. She was like, "Wait a minute, we never agreed he was going to be in charge," and so they chained him up while he was asleep. And their plan would have worked, but he was somehow able to call his allies from the Titan War to come and free him, and they did. And then he sentenced Apollo and Poseidon to 1,000 years of hard labor, and the end result was the walls of Troy.
Okay.
That's alluded to in the book, but yeah, for the most part, the gods get away with it in the original source material. There's even a trope name for that: Karma Houdini.
Karma Houdini. Okay.
That is not my. I did not think up that. I want to make that clear. It's from a site I enjoy called TV Tropes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an excellent resource for anybody that wants to study their favorite works of fiction further. They've got trope names like other examples includes suspiciously specific denial and surprisingly realistic outcome.
Mm-hmm. Now,
But
with Medusa, we're going to go back on that just a little bit. Was because they actually kind of brought her back to life. I'm going to put a
make sure you throw up a spoiler warning on
yeah,
that part.
spoiler warning. But they bring these gods. They bring back Medusa from the dead, and then the Amazons. Were they even mentioned in Greek mythology?
They were just there. It depends on the story. They're more like supporting characters, you could say. They were mentioned in the Iliad as supporting Troy. One of the 12 labors of Hercules was getting the girdle belt from the Amazon queen, Hippolyta. But yeah, I figured, once Medusa's brought back to life, she would probably not want to go back to her old life. And this is a way she could stay safe without having to be isolated from human contact for the rest of her life.
Right.
That's why Artemis says here, I know some people where I know somewhere you can go to and be safe for the rest of your life. Yeah, they were there's this one YouTuber, I can't remember her name offhand, but she does an analysis of the Amazons where she's like, yeah, they were a product of men's fear of women that don't fall within the societal norm. Every society at that time treated women badly, so it's probably not fair to call out the Greeks in particular.
Right. Well, that was just a weird time frame. I mean,
Yeah.
you actually read into the history of the Greeks, Spartans, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I will probably go further in depth with the sequel where the Trojans are seeking revenge on the Greeks for that little 10-year war. Like I figure yeah, I might make the Greek city-states answer for how they've treated their women
Right. Yeah,
over the
well,
years.
and I think that's probably been in all cultures and throughout all
I
time. The way they treat children, women, slaves. I don't think I don't think there was any real, you know, I don't think there was really a safe spot for them.
I know. And I'll full and I'm unapologetic that yeah, I am writing this through a modern lens. It is partially a commentary on the things I find wrong with the world. I'm not going to pretend that I'm completely unbiased or neutral on
Right.
things. Like
Exactly.
I even worked it in. You
Human
might even
human
remember a part where I
trafficking was another one that you actually talked about. You touched on it a little bit. Yeah, the way things are nowadays. But like I said, it's been like that for centuries, hundreds of
I know.
thousands of years. And I don't think it'll ever change
Mm,
unless
maybe
unless
without
people
conditions
people
improving.
change. You know.
Oh yeah, that's kind of one of the themes. Like we don't have to continue like this. Like, did you watch the reimagined Battlestar Galactica at all?
No, I didn't
Oh,
because I was
okay.
still kind of hung up on the old series. I
Well,
didn't
one
want to
of
ruin
the series catchphrase almost is all of this has happened before and all of this will happen again. But there is one scene where Leodama, who is ironically nicknamed Apollo, says, "But it doesn't have to happen again."
it.
That's
Yeah,
one of that's one of the themes I had in mind. Like, hey, we can change. That's why Hades is consistently harping on Artemis, Athena, and Hera. Why he called the story of the golden apple that Paris had to judge.
yeah.
That's why he calls them out and says, "Did you think about what would happen after this?
Mhm.
This was an opportunity to stop it."
Right. Yeah,
That's
and that's what Hades was trying to get all the other gods to think about was their actions.
or at least now by this point in the story, he wants them. He's confronting them with the severity of what they've done, and if you with a little more research into the original source material, I only touched on a fraction of what the gods did.
Mhm.
I even alluded to that with Zeus, where he says, "Zeus, your misdeeds could fill a library on their own, but I'm going to focus on some of your more recent ones."
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was because I've read just from what I remember from high school, and it's been a long time, but um, from reading all the Greek mythology then in that one particular class, um, there was a lot of indiscretions on the part of the Greek gods. And I know you touched on them briefly, but you didn't go into everything. But you just touched on those very briefly, just enough to keep the story going.
Yeah, and I also I had to find a balance because there's going to be some stuff that is well known already, like the story of Medusa, 12 Labors of Hercules, the Trojan Horse. Even people with no knowledge of Greek mythology know those things. So I wanted to put just enough in to give some context, but not so much that I was just burying the reader in exposition.
Right. Yeah. And you did a good job. You balanced it very well. And for
And
people,
with the future flash forward parts with Ares, I crafted that carefully so there was enough that people with knowledge of that kind of stuff would know what I was referring to. But again, I didn't want to spoon feed. I wanted to put in just enough info for them to be able to figure it out on their own. And with the soldiers, you know, with those soldiers that found Saddam's stash, I was like, okay, it might still not be quite clear enough. So I wrote in the name of the commanding general of the 3rd Infantry Division at the time.
well, I think all writers have that liberty where they actually inject people they know into their stories.
I don't know Major General Blount. I just know of him from this story. I've also did a little bit of research trying to get in contact with him to tell him, "Hey, General, you're in my book."
And of course,
But
nothing yet, huh?
No, I haven't been able to reach him. But but the real point of that is that he would see it and be like, "Oh, hey, I'm mentioned in this book," and then he'll tell people about it.
Right.
That's the real point. I'm not worried about offending any public figures with anything I write.
No, no,
Although, if someone would campaign to have my book banned, that would actually help me a lot.
I don't see why it would.
Well, contra. You remember are you familiar with Eric Bischoff?
No.
He was a WWE, WCW wrestling personality. He wrote a book of his own called, I think he either said it or it was a title of a book, Controversy Creates Cash.
He's very true on that.
Yeah, so that's why I want somebody to try and get my book banned. There's also the
I don't think
saying,
that's going to happen, but
I know it would have to get a lot. It would have to get a lot bigger.
Well,
I've got my audiobooks that are royalty share only deals. I wish somebody would campaign to get those banned too.
well, why? No, you don't want to do that. But
I know.
Yeah, but you done really well with this, your first book, Changing of the Gods, and we're going to have to wind down the show a little bit. Okay. I never could figure out how to end shows, never could, but we're going to wind it down. Changing of the Gods, Anthony J. Miano.
Yes.
And available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and authorhouse.com.
Correct. So, and it's available as an ebook also.
Ebook on
and
Barnes and Noble.
There will be an audiobook in the future.
Oh, audiobook. Are you going to narrate it?
Yes.
There you
There's
go.
no one else I would want to do that job.
Right. But
maybe James Earl Jones.
Well, that would be awesome. I think he retired here recently.
Yeah. He turned over the role of Darth Vader because his voice is just. The guy's in his 90s. He's lucky to still be alive at this point, and that's nothing against him. It's just he's in his 90s.
Yeah, but what a great guy that he is. But this book here, highly recommended to anybody out there interested. Changing of the Gods by Anthony J. Miano. And you will not be.
And anyone who enjoyed the sound of my voice, type Anthony J. Miano into Audible, and you can listen to some of the audiobooks I've narrated.
Right. And if people want to get a hold of you, how can they do
that? I'll just throw my email address in there. ajm2259@yahoo.com.
Right. Do you have your website?
It's under construction as we speak. I can also be reached on LinkedIn. Okay. That's another good way. Just type in Anthony Miano. Look for the one that's a narrator on Audible. There are at least 2 other Anthony Mianos I found last year. One's an elected official somewhere in New England, and the other's a college student in Virginia. He made the dean's list last fall. Good job on his part.
But that's not you.
No. I did go to college, but it was 14 years ago. And then again, I graduated last year. Yeah, LinkedIn and AJM2259@yahoo.com. If anyone, listeners or viewers, buy and read this book, please get in contact with me. Let me know how you feel.
Right. And book signings. Any future book signings?
No, not for now, because those were the events where I had to buy copies of my own book, and I quickly figured out that doesn't make fiscal sense.
Right. Gotcha. But you do have copies of your own book, and if people want to catch up with you and get it autographed and stuff like that, be sure to check out.
I'd be happy to mail back a signed copy for the ones that buy one. If they like it, they can send it to me. I'll sign it.
There you go. And then,
thanks for having me on the show, John. I appreciate it.
Well, AJ, I appreciate your time, man. And hopefully I can catch up with you again. I'm really looking forward to anything else you got writing. So
not sure when it'll be available.
But I'm pretty sure there's plenty of people that will be interested.
Oh yeah, especially if I get this book out to a bigger audience. To be honest, I'd kind of like to accomplish that before I publish another book.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're all figuring out the marketing angles. But AJ, it's been super nice having you on Shop Talk. I do appreciate your time and everything.
And I
And like I
appreciate the
said,
opportunity.
everybody, Changing of the Gods, go get a copy and leave a review on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Let's help out the little guy.
And tell as many people about it as you can. Good night, everybody.
Good night.